The great chamber of glass and steel was silent, but the silence was not one of peace. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm, the heavy pause before something breaks. The banners of dozens of alien nations hung high above the long, oval table, their colors bright and vivid against the cold metal walls. The galaxy's most powerful leaders sat in tense rows, their expressions masked with the polished calm of politics. In the center of it all, the representatives of Earth sat motionless, their faces unreadable, their hands folded in front of them. To anyone watching, it looked like humanity had come here to make peace. But those who knew better understood the truth. The peace treaty was a trap, carefully set, and humanity had walked straight into it. At least that's what the others believed. For months, the whispers had spread across the stars. Rumors of secret weapons, of hidden fleets, of Earth's rising influence among the younger colonies. Humanity had grown too quickly, too boldly, refusing to bow to the old empires that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. And now, the empires had gathered here under the guise of diplomacy, holding out the promise of peace while sharpening the blades behind their backs. The hall smelled of tension, sharp like metal and smoke, as if even the air itself could sense the lie being spun. The human delegation knew all of this. They knew the enemies across the table didn't come to offer peace. They came to watch, Earth kneel. The treaty laid before them was nothing more than a carefully written surrender, dressed up in fine words about unity and balance. If humanity signed, they would lose their independence. If they refused, the fleets waiting just beyond the star system would descend with fire and fury. Either way, the trap was already set. Or so the others thought. The lead negotiator leaned forward, his voice steady, almost casual as he read the words on the page. The aliens shifted slightly in their seats, their eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of predators who believed their prey had no way out. But beneath the calm surface, humanity carried something no one else in the chamber could see. They had not come unprepared. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every silence held longer than necessary was part of a larger plan. Humanity had studied the way of these empires, learned the patterns of their arrogance, and built something no trap could contain. They were not here to be caged. They were here to prove that Earth could not be cornered. The treaty itself was an insult. It demanded control of Earth's colonies, strict limitations on their fleets, and oversight from foreign powers who had once dismissed humans as little more than a curious experiment. It spoke of equality while demanding subjugation, of balance while tilting all power to the side of the empires, and yet the humans showed no sign of anger. No raised voices, no protests, only a quiet patience that unsettled those who watched closely, because patience was not weakness. Patience was the calm before revelation. Outside the chamber, hidden beyond the stars, fleets waited in the dark. The empires believed them to be fractured, scattered, vulnerable. They thought Earth's ships were slow, outdated, untested in the crucible of true galactic war. What they did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this very moment long before the treaty was even proposed. The trap was not one-sided. Humanity had built one of their own, woven from misdirection, silence, and a keen understanding of how the galaxy underestimated them. As the alien leaders prepared to seal their victory with a signature, a ripple of unease passed through the chamber. A subtle thing barely noticed, like a shadow crossing the light. One of the Empire's envoys shifted in his chair, his claws tapping nervously against the table. Another's crest feathers twitched in irritation. They could not name it, but they felt it. The human's calm was wrong, too controlled, too deliberate. It was the look of prey that did not fear the predator. And that was not how this was supposed to feel. The lead human looked up from the treaty, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. His words were measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of something far larger than himself. He did not argue. He did not reject the treaty outright. Instead, he asked a simple question, one that forced every delegate to pause, to wonder, to question whether they had truly seen the whole board. For a moment, the illusion of control cracked, and the empires glimpsed something they had not expected: humanity's quiet confidence. In the far reaches of space, signals pulsed through the void, silent and unseen. Orders were already moving across encrypted channels, activating plans laid down months, even years before. And still, within the chamber, no one but the humans knew. They smiled faintly, as though they were the ones watching predators walk willingly. Into the cage, the galaxy had always underestimated Earth. They thought humanity was reckless, fragile, too young to play in the arena of the great empires. But humans carried something different in their blood, a history of surviving against impossible odds, of finding strength in the very moments when defeat seemed certain. The peace treaty was meant to strip them of that strength, to bind them with words before fleets brought the final blow. But what the empires had never learned was that words could be weapons too, and the humans had come with blades sharper than any hidden fleet. The chamber grew colder, though no temperature had changed. The aliens shifted again, uncomfortable beneath the weight of something unseen. The humans signed nothing. They refused nothing. They only waited, letting silence fill the space where fear should have been. The trap was closing, yes, but no one could yet see for whom. And then, as the alien delegates leaned forward, expecting the moment of submission, the lead human finally spoke. His words were calm, almost too calm, but they carried a certainty that cut through the hall like steel. The empires had gathered to corner Earth, but now it was clear. Earth had been watching them all along. Every fleet movement, every whispered alliance, every secret plan hidden in shadows. The humans knew. The hall fell into silence once more, but this time it was different. This time, it was the silence of fear. Somewhere beyond the chamber walls, alarms would soon sound. Somewhere in the dark, ships would move where no ships should have been. Somewhere in the void, the true trap was about to spring. And when it did, the galaxy would finally learn that humanity was never prey. The treaty lay untouched on the table, its words empty, its promises broken before they were even spoken. The empires believed they had written the fate of Earth. But humanity had come prepared to write a different story. A story that would begin here, in this chamber, with the smallest crack in the mask of control. A story that would not end in chains, but in fire. The silence stretched one last time, heavy with tension. The empires leaned forward, eager to finish what they had started. The humans leaned back, calm and steady, waiting for the signal that would change everything. And as the final word left the lead human's lips, the galaxy teetered on the edge of revelation, because the peace treaty was never meant to bind humanity. It was meant to expose those who thought they could break them. And now, with the eyes of the galaxy upon them, the trap was about to close, just not on Earth. The chamber still hummed with that uneasy silence, but beyond the glass walls of the hall, space itself told another story. 1,000 ships lurked just beyond sensor range, hidden in the folds of dust clouds and behind the glare of nearby stars. The alien empires thought their fleets were invisible, perfectly positioned to strike, the moment Earth refused the treaty. They had calculated everything: the timing, the intimidation, even the words that would follow once humanity bent its knee. But what they did not calculate was the possibility that Earth had seen all of this coming long before. The human delegation sat still, each representative aware that every small movement was being studied. The eyes of dozens of species tracked their posture, their breathing, even the way they blinked. For the empires, this was a hunt, and the humans were prey caught in the open. But there was something behind the stillness, a sense of weight that the others could not understand. Humanity did not play games of survival by their rules. Humanity had written its own. The lead negotiator's calm voice had left an echo in the minds of those present. A simple question, harmless on the surface, but filled with layers the others had not expected. It had been like a crack in a flawless wall, one that made even the most confident among them glance toward their advisors with uncertainty. The humans were supposed to beg. Instead, they had forced the predators to hesitate. And hesitation, in a chamber full of rivals, was dangerous. Far from the council chamber, on the dark side of a moon orbiting a gas giant, a cluster of human ships lay dormant. They were quiet, their hulls coated in materials designed to bend light and swallow signals. To the casual scan, they looked like little more than drifting rocks, forgotten debris from some old war. But inside, crews waited in silence, watching the coded signals that rippled through the void. They knew their role, not to fire, not yet, but to listen, to wait for the moment when waiting would no longer matter. Humanity had learned the hard way that treaties could be traps. Earth's history was filled with agreements broken, with powerful nations demanding peace while sharpening knives behind their backs. That history was written deep into their memory, carried across centuries, whispered in stories of betrayal and survival. When the first stars had been reached, when the first alien ships had appeared above Earth, many thought old lessons would no longer apply. But they did, and the people who sat at the treaty table now carried those lessons with them. The empires saw humanity as reckless, daring, and untested, but what they missed was the depth of Earth's memory. They had not seen the centuries of conflict, the endless trial and error of nations rising and falling, the resilience born from never having the luxury of peace that lasted. Humanity had always lived one step from disaster, and that had shaped them into something the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Inside the chamber, one of the alien delegates cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stone. His voice was heavy, laced with authority, as he reminded the humans that delay was pointless. "Peace requires sacrifice," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "It is not weakness to accept guidance from those who have ruled long before you." The words echoed across the table, meant to press down like a weight. But the humans only listened, their faces calm. They had heard these words before, in different forms, in different centuries. They knew what they meant, submission disguised as generosity. Another delegate, her crest feathers shimmering in agitation, leaned forward. "The fleets that wait beyond this system are patient," she said. "But patience has limits. Sign, and you will have protection. Refuse, and you will know destruction." She thought the threat would rattle them, that the humans would break under the reminder of overwhelming force. But she missed the faint curve of a smile on the negotiator's lips. Protection was only another word for control, and destruction was a song Earth had danced to many times before. Behind that calm, humanity's representatives carried more than the weight of their world. They carried the unspoken knowledge of what waited in the dark. Months of careful preparation had led them here. Intelligence reports smuggled across hostile lines, scouts risking everything to map the hidden fleets, engineers working day and night to build systems the galaxy had never seen before. Every piece of the puzzle was in place. The only thing missing was the signal. Still, the tension hung thick. The alien leaders could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had expected fear, but there was none. They had expected anger, but there was only silence. The humans seemed to be waiting. But for what? The thought burrowed into their minds, growing with each second. In the human camp, far from the polished halls of diplomacy, soldiers sat inside dim-lit carriers, their weapons locked but ready. Pilots traced their fingers across controls, waiting for the order they both dreaded and longed for. They did not know if they would live to see the end of the day. What they knew was that if Earth fell, if humanity bowed here, then their children would never know freedom. And that knowledge was enough to keep their hands steady. The negotiator inside the chamber let the silence grow longer, stretching it until the alien delegates began to fidget. Silence was power, and the humans wielded it with precision. When he finally spoke again, his words carried a sharpness that was carefully hidden beneath politeness. He spoke of history, of promises made and broken, of times when peace had been offered as a weapon. His words did not accuse directly, but they painted a picture that was all too familiar. The aliens shifted again, uneasy, because the humans were not supposed to speak this way. Across the table, an older delegate, his scales dark with age, narrowed his eyes. "You come here knowing what is at stake," he said. "Do not mistake patience for weakness. Sign, or the galaxy will decide for you." His tone was final, sharp, leaving no room for argument. But the human only looked at him, calm, unflinching. It was the look of someone who had already prepared for the worst. And somewhere beyond the stars, the first faint movement stirred. A signal whispered across space, carried on a frequency that no empire had ever cracked. It reached the waiting. Ships hidden in the dark, and though no engines flared, though no weapons lit up, something shifted. Humanity's trap was waking. Inside the chamber, no one noticed. Not yet. The empires believed themselves to be the ones tightening the noose. They leaned closer, ready to force the final word, to see Earth bow as so many others had before. But in that moment, in the steady calm of the human silence, the balance of power had already begun to change. The peace treaty still sat on the table, the ink waiting for a hand that would never come. The galaxy thought it was only a matter of time. But time, like silence, was another weapon the humans had learned to master. And as the tension deepened, as the air itself seemed to hold its breath, the chamber became the stage for a truth no one yet understood. The trap was set, but no one could yet see who was truly inside it. And with every passing second, the line between hunter and prey grew thinner, ready to snap. The chamber's air felt heavier by the moment, as though the walls themselves were aware of what lay hidden beneath the polite exchange of words. Every delegate could sense it. Something was off. The humans were calm, too calm, and that calm was spreading like a shadow across the room. The alien leaders had come expecting resistance, maybe even a desperate plea, but not this stillness. That held a quiet strength. It unnerved them because they were predators who had seen prey freeze, but never prey, that looked back with eyes unblinking, steady, unafraid. One of the younger alien delegates, feathers still bright with youth, broke the rhythm of the negotiation. His voice carried arrogance, the kind born from believing he stood under the shield of overwhelming power. "Do you not understand the scale of what faces you?" he demanded, leaning across the table. "The fleets that wait beyond this system could erase your homeworld in a day. What do you have that makes you so sure you can stand against us?" His words were sharp, but beneath them, a trace of unease lingered. The humans gave no answer, only silence, and it was silence that burned hotter than any retort. Outside the chamber, in the vast void where the stars burned cold, the fleets of the empires waited. They were monstrous in scale, endless lines of ships with hulls bristling in steel and firepower. Carriers the size of cities floated in formation, their bays filled with squadrons of fighters ready to descend like locusts. To the galaxy, this was strength unquestionable. Yet in the darkness just beyond detection, human vessels clung to shadows, their forms small in comparison, but each carrying secrets that no alien empire had yet seen. On one of those hidden ships, a young officer stood before a screen that displayed faint readings of the enemy armada. Her hands were steady, though her heart pounded as she traced the outlines of their positions. She had grown up in the colonies, hearing stories of Earth's early struggles in space, of how the first human explorers had been dismissed as weak, as foolish children wandering into a world they could never survive. Now she stood at the edge of war, watching as those same voices of arrogance prepared to crush her people. She knew what her fleet carried, what it meant, but still the weight of the coming storm pressed down on her chest. Back in the chamber, the human negotiator finally shifted, drawing all eyes toward him. His voice remained calm as he spoke of peace, but his words carried strange edges, as though each was chosen to slice beneath the surface of the treaty. He spoke not of surrender, but of dignity, of the right of every world, human or alien, to choose its own path. The empires listened with narrowed eyes, already dismissing his words as a human attempt at sentiment, yet something about his tone made them uneasy. It was not the voice of a man trapped in defeat. It was the voice of someone holding a card unseen. Among the alien leaders, divisions began to crack open. Some saw the humans' calm as arrogance that must be punished swiftly. Others felt the tremor of doubt, wondering if perhaps they had underestimated Earth's resolve. Old rivalries simmered under the surface. For though they had united here to face a common threat, the empires had never truly trusted one another. Each alliance was temporary, each agreement fragile, and now the human silence pressed on. Those fractures like a hand testing where the stone might break. On Earth, billions watched the broadcast through official channels, their breath held as if they too were in that chamber. Families clutched hands, soldiers stood by their posts. Leaders in underground bunkers exchanged glances heavy with unspoken understanding. They knew what was at stake. Humanity's future was balanced on the edge of a single decision, a single moment that could shatter or shape their destiny. The negotiator finally broke the silence with a single phrase. His voice was steady, even quiet, but it cut sharper than any blade. "You underestimate us." The words carried no flourish, no grand speech, yet they struck deeper than any declaration could. The alien delegates bristled, some with fury, others with unease. The young feathered delegate who had shouted before slammed his claws against the table again, his voice cracking with rage. "Enough! If you refuse this treaty, then you bring destruction upon yourselves." His outburst was meant to dominate the moment, but it only revealed the fracture in his confidence. The negotiator leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but perhaps destruction is not ours to bear." And then the chamber fell into silence once more. It was the kind of silence that did not simply exist. It pressed down on everyone present, wrapping around them like chains. The alien leaders glanced at one another, their confidence shaken. They had believed Earth would be desperate to avoid war. But what if the humans had come not to avoid it, but to choose it on their own terms? In orbit above the system's star, alien fleets shifted slightly, as though their commanders sensed something was wrong. Formation lines tightened, signals whispered between ships, but still they saw nothing unusual. And yet, deep within the void, humanity's trap grew tighter. Their ships were waiting, silent, their weapons locked but concealed, their signals hidden under layers of encryption so advanced that no empire had ever cracked them. The young officer, aboard one of the hidden ships, felt her heart racing as she watched her console. The coded pulses were coming faster now, building toward something. She looked around at her crew, each one silent, each one waiting. They all knew the next signal could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The galaxy thought humanity was naive. They were about to learn how dangerous it was to mistake patience for weakness. Back in the chamber, the scaled elder who had remained quiet until now leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the humans. His voice was low, almost a growl, when he spoke. "You are playing a dangerous game," he said. Do you think you can face us all at once? Even if you have some hidden strength, it will not last against the weight of the galaxy." The negotiator met his gaze without flinching. "Then perhaps it is the galaxy," he said, "that should ask if it can face us." The words echoed through the chamber, and for the first time, no one answered. Even the most arrogant among the empires sat in silence, caught between fury and fear. The fleets beyond the system stirred restlessly, commanders growing impatient, eager to unleash fire. They believed the human silence was stalling, a last attempt to delay the inevitable. They had no idea how close they were to walking into the jaws of something far greater than they imagined. The negotiator's calm did not falter. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing into this single moment, the history of betrayal, the lessons of survival, the spirit of a species that had never been allowed the luxury of peace. Humanity had come prepared not only with fleets and weapons, but with the strength of memory, of endurance, of defiance carved into their very being. And as the tension coiled tighter, as every second stretched into eternity, the moment before, the storm hung heavy in the air, the treaty lay untouched, the fleets waited with claws sharpened, and the humans sat calm, patient, unbroken. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The silence in the chamber had reached its breaking point. Every delegate could feel it pressing against their skin, pulling at their thoughts, forcing them to wonder if they had miscalculated. Humanity's refusal to bend should have been foolish, but it did not feel like foolishness. It felt deliberate, like the calm of someone who already knew what would happen next. Yet just as the tension reached its peak, a ripple of disruption moved through the room, an unexpected signal flickering across the wall screens, cutting into the delicate balance of the negotiations. The alien leaders stiffened. Their fleets had sent a message directly into the chamber, overriding the usual layers of protocol. The channel burst alive with static before settling into the image of an officer, scaled and armored, his voice sharp with alarm. "Enemy movement. Detected," he announced. "Not from the humans, from another fleet." Confusion spread instantly. Delegates turned to one another, their faces betraying disbelief. This was not part of the plan. The trap had been meant for Earth alone, not for them. Another fleet, vast and unregistered, was moving into the system. It was not human, and it was not allied with any of the empires seated at the table. For the first time, the chamber erupted in true chaos. Accusations flew like sparks. One delegate snarled at another, accusing them of betrayal, while others shouted that it must be a trick engineered by the humans themselves. The negotiator sat in silence, his calm demeanor now even more unsettling, because he looked less surprised than anyone else in the room. Far beyond the chamber, in the dark folds of space, sensors strained to capture the newcomers. The readings grew clear, and the truth sent shockwaves through every command center watching. The fleet was massive, larger than most single empires could field, and its technology pulsed with energy signatures that no one fully recognized. It was not human, but it was something worse. An ancient alliance of species thought long dormant, exiled to the edges of the galaxy. Now they had returned, not to make peace, but to take advantage of the chaos. Inside one of the hidden human ships, the young officer stared at her display in disbelief. She had trained for months to face the fleets that had surrounded them, had memorized every formation, every likely attack pattern. But this new arrival changed everything. The board had shifted in a way no one could have predicted, and even her commander's face had gone pale as the readings scrolled across the screen. On Earth, the broadcasts faltered for a moment, replaced by confused whispers from news anchors and officials who scrambled to explain the new threat. Billions of people watched as the narrative changed in real time. It was no longer just Earth versus the empires. Now, another power had entered the field, one with motives no one could read. Families who had been holding their breath felt a deeper fear settle in their bones. Soldiers in orbit checked their weapons again, wondering if the fight ahead was one they could even win. In the chamber, the alien delegates turned their fury toward the humans. "This is your doing," one shouted, slamming his claws against the table. "You called them here to strengthen your hand." The negotiator did not flinch. "If you believe that," he said softly, "then you have given us more credit than you ever meant to." His words only deepened the suspicion, but deep down the empires knew the truth. These newcomers were not allies of Earth. They were opportunists, drawn by the scent of blood. And if war broke out now, it would not just be Earth that suffered. It would be everyone. The scaled elder leaned forward, his eyes blazing with fury. "You see what your defiance has brought? You could have signed and ended this quietly. Now the galaxy itself turns against us all." His words carried weight, but even he knew they were hollow. The humans had not summoned this fleet, and yet the timing was undeniable. The negotiator met his gaze steadily. Perhaps the galaxy was always waiting for this moment. Perhaps it is not Earth that stands at the edge, but all of you. His voice was calm, but beneath it was the steady pulse of something dangerous, truth. Outside, the newcomers' ships moved with frightening coordination. They ignored the treaty fleet entirely and set their trajectory straight toward the system's heart. The alien commanders scrambled to adjust, sending frantic orders. But every move they made revealed cracks in their unity. Old rivals bickered over who should command the defense, who should lead the first strike. Humanity's hidden ships listened, silent and patient, as the very alliances that had tried to corner them began to unravel. The young officer on the human vessel clenched her fists, her mind racing. This was not what she had trained for, but she understood the opportunity. If the empires tore themselves apart in panic, humanity might finally step out from the shadow of their arrogance. But if the newcomers struck first, it could be the end of everyone, human and alien alike. In the chamber, the tension became unbearable. The alien delegates shouted over one another, their words dissolving into noise, until the negotiator raised his voice for the first time in hours. It was not loud, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. "If you want survival," he said, "then perhaps it is time you stopped treating us as prey, because the storm you thought you set for us now threatens you all." His words struck hard, because they were true. For the first time, the empires realized the trap might not belong to humanity, or to them, but to this third power that had been watching from the shadows of history. On Earth, the broadcasts grew darker as the new fleet came into view. Ordinary people stared at the screens, whispering prayers or curses, their hearts torn between terror and pride. They had always known humanity was underestimated, but no one had expected the galaxy to fracture in this way. Some whispered that this was fate, that Earth's struggle had dragged hidden powers into the open. Others feared it was the beginning of extinction. The negotiator sat in silence again, his hands folded, his gaze steady. He had expected treachery from the empires. He had expected betrayal written into every line of the treaty, but he had not expected this. Still, he did not flinch. Humanity had faced storms before, storms that should have ended them, and yet they had endured. Perhaps this was simply another storm, larger and darker, but no different in truth. The fleets beyond the chamber began to move, their formations breaking as commanders argued and orders overlapped. The newcomers pressed forward without hesitation, their ships burning brighter against the void, their intent clear. The galaxy was about to fracture in ways no one could control, and in that moment, as chaos spread through the chamber and panic rippled across the fleets, the negotiator leaned forward once more. His voice was calm, steady, unyielding. "The peace treaty was always a trap," he said. "But now the trap is not ours. It is yours." The chamber froze, the words hanging, heavy in the air. The alien leaders turned toward him with fury, suspicion, and fear. And beyond the walls, the stars themselves seemed to draw closer, as though the galaxy was holding its breath before the firestorm began. The chamber shook with the sound of distant alarms. Every delegate turned toward the wall screens as the image of the newcomer's fleet filled the air, their vast silhouettes moving closer with a precision that was chilling. For centuries, the empires had believed themselves untouchable. But now the reality pressed against them like a weight. There was a threat greater than they had imagined, and it had arrived at the very moment they were most divided. Panic flickered. Across faces, anger erupted in voices, and still the human delegation sat silent, calm in the eye of the storm. In the depths of space, the fleets finally collided. Alien warships surged forward to intercept the newcomers, their weapons igniting, in bursts of blue and gold that cut across the void. But the newcomers responded with a ferocity no one expected. Their ships were not just powerful, they were fast, too fast, moving in ways that defied the traditional patterns of warfare. Within minutes, the first lines of the Empire's fleets were torn apart, their carriers left adrift, their formations shattered. Inside one of the hidden human ships, the young officer gripped her console as the battle unfolded on her screen. Her commander's voice rang steady across the deck. "Hold positions. Wait for the signal." Every instinct screamed at her to act, but she obeyed, her hands hovering over the controls. Humanity had not hidden this long to waste the moment. They would not reveal themselves until the time was right. Back in the chamber, the alien leaders shouted at one another, blaming betrayal, demanding immediate retaliation. Some argued to sign the treaty on the spot to force humanity into their ranks against this greater enemy. Others screamed that the humans had orchestrated this all along, but the negotiator's voice cut through the noise. "We told you we do not bow, and now you see why. The galaxy is not yours to control. It never was." His calm tone struck harder than the chaos outside, because his words mirrored the truth they could no longer deny. The newcomers pressed deeper into the system, their weapons tearing through ship after ship. The empires fought back with desperate fury, but every counterattack only revealed the cracks in their unity. For centuries they had ruled through fear and dominance, but fear does not bind when true survival is at stake. Alliances splintered, orders clashed, and their once unshakable fleets began to falter. Then, at last, the signal came. It was small, nothing more than a pulse of light across the void. But for humanity's hidden fleets, it was the spark that ignited the storm. Engines flared, weapons roared to life, and ships that had lain silent for hours surged forward from the shadows. The newcomers had expected the Empire's resistance, but they had not expected a third force, one that struck with surgical precision, cutting through the chaos to reveal the strength Earth had hidden all along. The young officer's ship dove into the fray, her hands steady on the controls as human vessels unleashed weapons the galaxy had never seen. Swarms of drones poured into the battlefield, each one small and swift, darting through the gaps in enemy armor before detonating with devastating effect. Massive rail cannons thundered from carriers disguised as drifting debris, their projectiles tearing holes through ships that had once seemed indestructible. Humanity had prepared not just to survive, but to turn the very arrogance of their enemies into their undoing. In the chamber, the alien delegates froze as reports streamed in. Their fleets were collapsing, their rivals turning against them, and now humanity was striking with a strength that could not be ignored. The negotiator's expression never wavered as he spoke into the silence. "You believed the treaty was our trap. You thought we would be the ones bound by it. But the only chains here are those you built for yourselves." The scaled elder slammed his fist against the table, his voice shaking with fury. "You'll burn with the rest of us," he roared. But even he knew the truth. Humanity's fleets were not breaking. They were rising. The battle raged on, the void filled with fire and wreckage. The newcomers pressed hard, but their advance slowed as humanity struck from angles they had not anticipated. Where the empires faltered, the humans held firm, their ships fighting not as scattered prey but as a united force. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. For the first time, the galaxy witnessed Earth not as a struggling newcomer, but as a power that refused to yield. On Earth, the broadcasts carried the images live. Families cried out in fear and hope as they watched human ships stand against the storm. Soldiers in orbit clenched their fists, their pride swelling as they saw their comrades fight with unmatched resolve. The entire world held its breath, knowing their future was being carved in fire among the stars. But just as the empires began to collapse under the dual assault of the newcomers and the humans, the second twist struck. The newcomers' fleet, for all its ferocity, suddenly shifted tactics. Instead of pressing their attack, they began to fall back, their ships moving with the same eerie precision they had shown on arrival. Confusion rippled across every command channel. Why retreat when victory seemed within their grasp? The answer came moments later. A massive structure, hidden until now, emerged from the shadow of the system's star. It was not a ship. It was a fortress, larger than anything the empires had ever built, bristling with weapons that glowed with a power no one recognized. The newcomers had not come merely to fight. They had come to stake a claim, to plant their strength at the very heart of contested space. The fleets had been only a distraction. This was their true weapon. The negotiator's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened as the fortress filled the screens. "So this was always their plan," he murmured, "not to destroy us, to cage us." The empires stared in shock, their voices gone, their confidence shattered. They had been so focused on crushing Earth that they had never seen the larger trap closing around them all. But humanity had. As the fortress prepared to unleash its power, the hidden edge of Earth's preparations revealed itself. Massive signals lit up across the battlefield, activating systems buried deep within the void. Satellites disguised as asteroids powered to life, their cores glowing bright, linking together into a web of energy that surrounded the system. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more dangerous: control. The web pulsed once, and the fortress's weapons faltered. Another pulse, and the newcomers' ships staggered, their systems scrambled, their formations breaking. Humanity had not only prepared fleets, they had prepared the field itself, turning the system into a trap that none of their enemies had expected. The empires stared in disbelief as the fortress itself flickered, its weapons stalling under the invisible grip of Earth's design. The negotiator looked across the table, his voice steady, final. "You built this treaty to break us, but we built this moment to show you. Humanity does not bow, humanity endures, and now you will endure us." The chamber fell into stunned silence as the reports poured in. The fortress struggled against the web, its power clashing with the invisible net humanity had cast. The newcomers fought to retreat, their fleet breaking under the strain. The empires, once so certain of their dominance, could only watch as the balance of the galaxy shifted before their eyes. And then came the final twist. As the web pulsed again, crippling the fortress, a single human ship broke formation. Smaller than the rest, almost insignificant, it dove straight toward the fortress's core. The young officer was at its helm, her voice calm over the comms as she spoke. "For Earth, for all of us." Her ship vanished into the fortress's light, and for a moment the void went silent. Then the explosion tore through space, shattering the fortress from within. The battlefield froze, every fleet halting as the shockwave rippled outward. Humanity had not only survived, they had struck the final blow, and in that moment, the galaxy saw them not as prey, not as a young species fumbling into war, but as a force that had defied the impossible. The negotiator closed his eyes briefly, then looked across the table one last time. "The peace treaty is finished," he said. "Now begins something new." But even as the words left his lips, a question lingered in the silence. If humanity could do this, if they could topple fleets, outthink empires, and shatter fortresses, then what else had they prepared for? And in the eyes of every delegate, fear remained. Because the galaxy had underestimated Earth once. They would not make that mistake again. The chamber was quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of tension. It was the silence that followed, a storm. When the echoes of destruction were still fresh, and no one knew what would come next. The images of the shattered fortress flickered across the wall screens, the light of its explosion still drifting through the system. The galaxy had changed in a single moment, and every delegate in that room knew it. Humanity, the species they had sought to trap, had not only survived the combined pressure of the empires, but had turned the tide against an enemy none of them had expected. The alien leaders sat frozen, their earlier arrogance stripped away. They had believed they could dictate terms, believed they could write the fate of Earth with ink and threats. Now they looked across the table at the human delegation with something different in their eyes. It was not respect yet, not trust, but it was no longer dismissal. It was fear, sharpened by the realization that humanity was not what they thought it was. The negotiator leaned forward at last, his hands resting calmly on the table. His voice carried the same steadiness it always had, but there was something final in his tone now. "The treaty you brought here is nothing but ash. The galaxy has seen what your promises of peace truly mean, and it has seen what happens when you underestimate us. Humanity will not kneel, not to you, not to anyone. If you want peace, it must be true peace, built on respect, not chains." No one answered. The scaled elder who had shouted so fiercely before only bowed his head slightly, his eyes flickering with the quiet shame of one who knew his power had been broken. The feathered youth sat still, his earlier fury drained into silence, one by one. The empires realized they had lost more than a battle. They had lost the illusion that they could control Earth's future. In the void, human fleets regrouped, their ships battered but unbroken. Crews cheered quietly as the last fragments of the fortress burned away, but their cheers were tinged with grief. The sacrifice of the small ship that had dived into the enemy's core weighed heavy on them. The young officer's name was already being whispered across channels. Her act of courage carried like a banner. For some, she was proof of humanity's unbreakable spirit. For others, a reminder of the cost of survival. On Earth, billions watched the broadcasts and felt a swell of pride that drowned out their fear. They had seen their people stand against the most powerful forces the galaxy could throw at them and endure. Families clutched each other tighter, tears streaming down their faces, knowing their children might now grow in a galaxy where Earth was no longer a pawn, but a power in its own right. Soldiers in orbit saluted the images of the fleets returning home, their hearts heavy with loss, but alive with the fire of victory. The newcomers' retreat left questions no one could answer. Who were they truly? How long had they been hiding, waiting for the chance to strike? And why had they chosen this moment? The shattered remains of their fortress suggested their ambitions were greater than anyone had feared. Even in defeat, the shadow of their presence lingered. The negotiator did not dismiss this. He knew that humanity had won the day, but the galaxy had revealed a deeper danger, one that would not disappear so easily. Still, for the empires who had gathered here to watch Earth's submission, the lesson was clear. Humanity had proven it could not be broken, and more than that, it had proven it could outthink, outfight, and outlast even the most carefully laid traps. No delegate left that chamber without carrying the memory of what they had seen, and none would dare underestimate humans again. In the days that followed, the galaxy shifted. The old alliances that had united against Earth began to fracture, each empire retreating to lick its wounds, wary now not only of humanity, but of each other. Some reached out with cautious words, their promises softer, their threats gone. Others turned inward, unwilling to admit how close they had come to disaster. For humanity, this was the first true step onto the galactic stage. Not as prey, not as a pawn, but as a force that demanded recognition. On Earth, ceremonies honored the fallen. The young officer's name was etched into stone, her image broadcast across the world as a symbol of sacrifice. Children spoke her name in classrooms, soldiers whispered it before sleep, and leaders invoked it in speeches about unity and resilience. Her act had not only destroyed the fortress, it had reminded humanity itself what it meant to endure, to fight for a future even when the odds seemed impossible. The negotiator returned home to find his people waiting, their eyes filled with questions. He could not yet answer. Would the Empire strike again? Would the newcomers return with another fortress, another plan? He did not know. But what he did know was that humanity had faced the storm and survived. And survival was the foundation of everything to come. The memory of the treaty remained, not as a document but as a symbol of arrogance. The arrogance of those who thought they could bind a species that had survived everything its own world had thrown at it. The words of that false peace would be remembered for generations, a warning carved into history. But alongside it, the images of human ships rising from the shadows, of a fortress breaking apart under their fire, would stand as proof of something greater. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been before that day. It was more dangerous, more uncertain, with new enemies revealed and old ones broken. But within that danger lay opportunity. For the first time, humanity had the chance to shape its place not as a victim of larger powers, but as a voice strong, enough to demand its own future. And yet, as the stars returned to silence, a single question lingered in the hearts of all who had witnessed the battle. If Earth had prepared this much, if it had hidden fleets, weapons, and systems capable of changing the tide of war, what else had it prepared? What else waited in the shadows, unseen, for the moment when the galaxy dared to test them again? The negotiator stood before his people, his voice steady as ever. "We have endured. We will endure again, and we will never bow." His words were carried across the world, across the colonies, across the stars, until they became more than just a statement. They became a vow. The peace treaty was forgotten, the trap dismantled, the false promises burned away. In its place stood a new truth, one that could not be erased. Humanity had been underestimated for the last time, and in the quiet that followed, as the stars glimmered like watchful eyes, the galaxy itself seemed to acknowledge it. Humanity was no longer at the edge of history. Humanity had stepped into the center. The story was finished, but its echoes had only just begun.